I never thought I'd end up in that cabin. I had heard stories, of course, everyone had. It's funny, though, how you can dismiss something until you're in the middle of it, standing in front of it, unsure of what to expect. It started as a spur-of-the-moment decision to get away. I needed some time to myself, a break from everything. Work, life, the noise of the city. It was too much. So I rented a cabin out in the woods. Secluded, peaceful. At least that's how they advertised it. I'd driven for hours, my car winding down narrow roads that barely fit a vehicle. The trees seemed to get closer with every mile. By the time I arrived, the sun was dipping low behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the dirt road that led to the cabin. The cabin was small, made of rough-hewn logs with a porch that creaked when I stepped onto it. The smell of pine and earth filled the air, and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees made everything feel quieter, more isolated. I thought it was perfect. Inside, the cabin was simple but cozy. A fireplace took up most of one wall, and the wooden floors had a kind of charm to them, worn smooth by years of use. There was a small kitchen area and a single bedroom. The windows were large, offering a clear view of the surrounding woods. I noticed the windows were old, with the kind of foggy glass that hinted at age. The cabin had clearly been here for a long time, though it was well maintained. I didn't think much of it. The silence outside was calming. I unpacked my things, made a quick dinner, and settled in for the night. I didn't even bother to lock the door, feeling foolish for thinking I might need to. The night was crisp, colder than I expected. As I sat by the fire, the only sounds were the crackling of the wood and the occasional wind gust outside. It was peaceful, too peaceful. As I sat there, something about the place felt off. It wasn't overt, just a subtle tension in the air. Maybe it was just me, my imagination running wild. But something nagged at me. I tried to shake it off and read for a bit, but sleep started to pull at me. I was about to head to bed when I heard it, a sound in the distance. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, closer this time. A low, guttural growl. It wasn't any animal I recognized. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I stood by the window, trying to peer into the night, but all I could see was the dense, black outline of trees. I told myself it was nothing. Probably a wild animal, bears, wolves, maybe a coyote. I'd heard them before. They weren't so scary when you weren't hearing them in the pitch dark, surrounded by trees. But then, there was another sound. A thud, followed by a dragging noise. My breath hitched. It wasn't the typical shuffle of an animal. It sounded too deliberate, like something or someone was moving through the woods, making its way toward the cabin. I grabbed the flashlight, the one I'd packed just in case, and stepped outside onto the porch. My breath came out in thick clouds, the cold air biting at my skin. I swept the beam of light across the trees, but nothing moved. It was too dark to see anything clearly, but I swore I saw something shifting behind the trunks. A figure? No, that was impossible. It was probably just my eyes playing tricks. I felt stupid for going outside. Whatever it was, if anything at all, it was probably harmless. I made my way back inside, double-checked that the door was locked, and pulled the curtains shut. As I lay in bed, the wind outside howled, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, I woke up late, the sun already climbing high in the sky. My heart was still pounding from the night before, but I tried to brush it off. The woods around the cabin looked different in the daylight, less threatening. Still, there was a nagging sense that something wasn't right. I decided to go for a walk, to clear my mind. The woods were quiet, the only sound the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath my boots. I didn't venture far, staying close to the cabin. As I walked, I noticed something strange. There were marks on the trees, deep gouges in the bark, as though something large had scraped its claws along them. They looked fresh, too fresh to be from last year's storm. I stopped, staring at the marks. Something about the pattern made my skin crawl. It was as if the creature, or whatever had made them, was circling the cabin, watching me. I turned back to the cabin, quickening my pace. When I reached the porch, I froze. There, at the edge of the woods, I saw a figure standing motionless between the trees. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its posture was wrong, bent at an odd angle, like it was trying to hide but couldn't quite manage to. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, my eyes locked on it, before it moved. It didn't run. It didn't walk. It simply shifted, its body tilting forward and then back, like a twisted creature trying to imitate human movement. My pulse skyrocketed. I grabbed the door and slammed it shut behind me, locking it and bolting it just to be safe. I leaned against the door, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. That thing, whatever it was, wasn't normal. And it wasn't just some animal. I didn't know what to do. The idea of leaving crossed my mind, but I had no cell service. The nearest town was miles away, and I wasn't about to drive through those woods in the dark. So I stayed, sitting in the cabin, hoping it was just a bad dream, a trick of the light. That night, the growls returned, but this time they were closer, much closer, and this time I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the rifle I'd noticed in a corner of the cabin earlier, a heavy thing that felt like it might provide some protection, even if I wasn't sure how to use it. The night felt suffocating. Every creak of the cabin, every crack of a branch outside sent my heart racing. I heard it then, a soft scratching at the door, not like an animal pawing, but deliberate, slow, like something testing its strength against the wood. The sound was followed by a low, almost human-like sniffing. I gripped the rifle tighter, my hands slick with sweat. I had to be imagining it. There was no way. Then, a thud. The door shuddered as something heavy collided with it. I stumbled backward, adrenaline flooding my system. Whatever was out there, it was no longer trying to be discreet. It was testing me, and I didn't know how long I could keep up this charade. I aimed the rifle at the door, waiting for the next sound. My mind raced through every possibility. What if it was a person? A hunter, maybe? But no human moved like that. No human could bend their body in such unnatural ways. Then the door opened, just a crack, and then a little more. My heart skipped a beat. The creature was inside. It was real. I barely had time to react. The door burst open, slamming against the wall with such force I almost dropped the rifle. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure. It was tall, its body unnervingly thin, and its skin was an odd mix of brown and gray, stretched too tight over its bones. Its face, it had no face, just dark, hollow spaces where eyes should be. Its mouth, if it could even be called that, was a jagged line, like it had been torn apart and never fully healed. I didn't hesitate. I fired. The sound of the shot rang in my ears, deafening in the small space. The creature staggered back, but it didn't fall. It didn't scream. It didn't bleed. It just hissed, a sound that didn't belong to anything alive. The darkness seemed to swallow it as it retreated, disappearing back into the night. I didn't move for a long time, too scared to breathe, but eventually, when the silence returned, I realized something important. The thing that had come for me wasn't just some wild animal. It was something older, something that could imitate anything it wanted, something that could make you think you were safe until it was too late. I didn't sleep that night, and the next morning, I packed up and left. I didn't even care about the cabin anymore. It wasn't a place of peace. It was a trap. I never went back. The woods kept their secrets, but I kept mine too. Some things you don't tell anyone. Some things you just leave behind. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend, the kind where you get away from everything. No emails, no constant notifications, just you and the woods. I'd rented a small cabin out in the middle of nowhere, thinking I could finally have some peace. A break from the noise, the bustle of the city, the people. Just me, nature, and solitude. What could go wrong? When I first saw the cabin, it looked like something straight out of a picture book. The wood was weathered, the roof slightly slanted from years of rain and snow. There was a small porch with a few wooden chairs, perfect for sitting and staring out into the forest. I parked my car, grabbed my bags, and walked up the creaky stairs. The air smelled fresh, pine-heavy, like a long walk through the forest. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The cabin had an old, rustic feel to it. The furniture was mismatched. An old leather couch that looked like it had seen better days, a wooden dining table in the center with a couple of chairs that were barely hanging on. But it had character, something real. It didn't feel too sterile or commercial, which was exactly what I wanted. I unpacked my things, set my phone down on the counter, and went out to explore. The woods stretched on forever in every direction. A blanket of trees so thick you could barely see the sky. Felt peaceful at first, like a place where you could breathe again. The sound of the wind in the branches, the occasional rustle of animals in the underbrush. But soon enough, the silence began to feel strange. Not the comfortable kind of quiet you get in a remote place, but the eerie kind, the kind that makes you feel like you're being watched. I shook it off, though. Maybe it was just the isolation. I was used to being surrounded by people, noise, constant movement. Out here, it was just me and the trees, and that's a lot more space than I was used to. I decided to take a walk down a path I saw that cut through the forest. The earth beneath my boots was soft, damp from recent rain. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. There was no wind anymore, no rustling of leaves. It was as if the forest had swallowed the sound whole. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the mind, maybe a branch breaking or an animal moving through the brush. But then I heard it again. Footsteps, not from the direction I was walking in, but from behind me. Slow, heavy steps like someone or something was walking on two legs. My heart started racing. I stopped dead in my tracks, turning around to look. There was nothing. I waited for a moment, straining my ears, but the footsteps didn't come again. I convinced myself it was just my nerves, the isolation getting to me. I turned back and kept walking, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. But every time I glanced over my shoulder, I could swear I saw movement in the trees, just beyond my line of sight, like something was moving with me. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun was setting. The sky was a deep orange, casting long shadows across the cabin. I felt a chill creeping up my spine as I climbed the stairs, the sense of being watched still hanging over me. The door creaked shut behind me, and I locked it. I wasn't sure why I locked it. I never locked doors when I was alone, but tonight I did. I sat on the couch trying to relax, but my mind kept going back to that feeling in the woods. Something was out there. Something wasn't right. My eyes kept flicking to the window, as if expecting to see someone or something staring back at me from the darkness. As night fell, the silence in the cabin seemed to grow. The kind of silence that presses in on you, making your thoughts too loud. My phone sat on the counter, untouched. I had no service out here anyway. The only light came from the flickering fire in the wood stove and the dim glow of the old lamps hanging on the walls. I tried to read a book to take my mind off things, but the words blurred together. Then I heard it again. A tapping, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. It was coming from the porch. I got up, slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. My feet were frozen to the floor, but I knew I had to see what it was. I crept toward the door, peering through the small window next to it. There was nothing, no one out there, just the empty porch and the trees beyond. But the tapping continued. It sounded like it was coming from the wooden steps, like something was pawing at them, testing them. I stood there, holding my breath, wondering if I should open the door and look. My gut told me not to, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door a crack, just enough to peer outside. The night air was cold and still, a thick fog beginning to roll in. I could barely see the ground beyond the porch. That's when I saw it. A dog. At first, I thought it was just a stray. It was standing on the steps, staring at me with glowing eyes. Its fur was matted and dirty, patches missing from its body as if it had been through some kind of struggle. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me, and for some reason, it made my blood run cold. The dog wasn't barking. It wasn't growling. It just stood there, unmoving, as if it was waiting for me to do something. My heart raced, and my instincts screamed at me to shut the door, lock it, and never open it again. But I stood there, unable to look away. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like hours. The dog never moved, never made a sound. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed the door shut, locking it again, my hands shaking. I backed away, breathing hard. What was that thing doing? Why hadn't it left? I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, watching the dog through the small window. I thought about calling the owner of the cabin, but what would I even say? Hey, there's a weird dog outside? No, I didn't want to sound insane. I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't normal. It was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to silence. I cautiously opened the door, but the dog was gone. The porch was empty. I stepped outside, looking around. There was no sign of it, no tracks in the dirt, nothing. It was as if it had never been there at all. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. Something had been out there, something I couldn't explain. I stayed in the cabin for another 2 days, but nothing else strange happened. No dogs, no footsteps, no weird sounds in the night. It was as if the woods had swallowed up everything that had happened. I left the cabin feeling uneasy but convinced that whatever had happened was behind me. But when I got home, I noticed something strange. Picture on my phone. One I didn't remember taking. It was a blurry shot of the cabin, the porch, and in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was the dog. Its glowing eyes stared out from the darkness, watching me. I don't know how it got there. I don't know what that thing was. But I do know one thing. I'm never going back to that cabin. The forest was always quiet in the early morning, and that's what I liked about it. I could sit on the porch of the cabin, a cup of coffee in hand, and listen to the birds, the wind rustling the trees, and the distant sound of a stream I hadn't bothered to explore yet. It felt peaceful, a little isolated, and for someone who didn't like being around too many people, it was perfect. I was alone and it felt right. I had been staying in the cabin for almost a week now, not really sure why I decided to take this trip. I just needed some time to myself, away from the noise of the city, the constant hum of social media, the pressure of work. Just me, the woods, and my thoughts. It was supposed to be a retreat, a moment to breathe. The cabin was small, but sturdy, nestled in a dense part of the woods. It was an old hunting cabin that had been refurbished, and there was something comforting about how worn it was. The wooden walls creaked when the wind blew too hard, and the old furnace hissed when I turned it on. There was a small lake nearby, a few miles down the trail, and I'd been considering walking to it, but I was in no rush. After all, the point of being out here was to slow down, to escape. On the 5th morning, things started to feel different. I woke up early again, the air still and heavy, with an overcast sky that promised rain. The birds weren't as loud as they usually were, and that struck me as odd. It was like something had silenced the whole forest. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the weather, and grabbed my coffee. As I sat there on the porch, I noticed something strange. It was a faint sound at first, but it grew louder as I listened. It was a crackling noise, like dry twigs breaking. I set my cup down and stood up slowly, peering into the woods. First, I didn't see anything, just the usual shadows between the trees, the wind shifting the branches. But then I saw it, a flash of movement, too quick for my eyes to catch clearly, but it was unmistakable. A sleek, tawny shape, low to the ground, disappearing behind a large rock near the edge of the tree line. My heart skipped a beat. I knew what it was, a bobcat. I had heard stories from the locals, of course, about how these cats could be dangerous if they felt cornered or threatened, but they were rarely aggressive unless provoked. Still, the sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. I had read that bobcats were territorial, but I had assumed they stayed away from humans. I stood there for a few moments, just watching the spot where it had disappeared. The forest felt still again, almost unnaturally quiet. I figured it was probably just passing through, looking for food. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I went back inside, trying to convince myself it was no big deal. But something about that fleeting glimpse of the bobcat stuck with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. The rest of the day was uneventful. I spent some time reading inside, occasionally stepping out onto the porch to listen to the woods. Every now and then, I felt like something was moving in the trees, but when I looked, nothing was there. I started to feel like I was imagining things, or that I was just on edge. But as the day wore on and dusk began to settle in, I couldn't help but notice that the world outside felt a little too quiet. The usual sounds of animals, squirrels rustling, birds calling, had all but disappeared. I thought I heard a faint sound, something like paws patting softly against the dirt. But when I stepped out onto the porch to check, there was nothing. Still, I felt a strange pressure, as if I wasn't alone anymore. Something about the forest felt off, like I was being watched. I went inside, locking the door behind me. That night, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. I kept hearing what sounded like movement outside, but whenever I peered through the windows, there was nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to push the anxiety out of my mind. I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. Around midnight, I woke up to a faint noise. At first, it was just a rustle, like leaves shifting in the wind. But then it became something more deliberate, something closer. I froze, listening. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of something moving just outside my cabin. Not the wind, not an animal looking for food. This was different. I grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand and crept toward the window. My breath caught in my throat when I saw it. The bobcat, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark, was standing just a few yards from the cabin. It was staring at me. I could feel the weight of its gaze, and my heart hammered in my chest. It didn't move. It didn't even seem to blink, just stared at the cabin as if waiting for something. I slowly backed away from the window, my mind racing. What was it doing? Why wasn't it running away like I thought it would? I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were trembling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the bobcat wasn't just passing through. It was watching me. I had no idea how long it stayed there, but eventually, the sound of its steps faded, and I heard nothing. I stayed up for the rest of the night, my eyes never leaving the window. The wind outside continued to howl, but I didn't hear the bobcat anymore. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke up the next morning to find the cabin still and silent. It was a quiet, eerie morning. The sun had risen, and though the storm from the night before had passed, the world outside felt different. The forest felt too still. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike to the lake, thinking the walk might clear my mind. As I walked through the trees, I tried to shake off the feeling that something was following me, but the thought kept creeping back into my head. I wasn't alone. I wasn't imagining things. I couldn't explain it, but I knew the bobcat was out there, and it was following me. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but then I noticed the tracks. Fresh paw prints in the mud, leading from the cabin and following the trail I had just walked. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just a coincidence. The bobcat had been trailing me, staying just out of sight, always a step behind. I turned around, heading back to the cabin as quickly as I could without panicking. I felt eyes on me the whole time, the distinct sense that I was being hunted. I picked up my pace, pushing through the underbrush, until I finally saw the cabin in the distance. When I reached it, I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't leave the cabin for the rest of the day. I didn't dare go outside. The bobcat was out there somewhere watching me. I could feel its presence, just beyond the trees, waiting. The thought of it kept me up all night again. The next morning, when I finally ventured out, I found the tracks had stopped at the edge of the woods. It was like the bobcat had disappeared, vanishing into the forest. I didn't see it again, but I knew it had been there. I knew it had been watching me the whole time. That was the last day I spent at the cabin. I packed up and left as quickly as I could. There was something unsettling about the whole experience, something I couldn't explain, but I didn't need to. I knew one thing for sure. I had not been alone in the woods, and whatever had been watching me, I wasn't going to stick around to find out what it wanted. I've been looking forward to this weekend. A cabin in the woods, far away from the noise and rush of the city, just what I needed. The plan was simple. Get away, relax, recharge, and maybe do a little hiking around the area. I wasn't prepared for what I'd end up experiencing. It wasn't just the isolation that made it unnerving, though that was a big part of it. There was something in the woods, something that didn't belong. It all started when I first arrived. The cabin was exactly what I expected: old, weathered, with that rustic charm you'd find in a place meant to be a getaway. The wooden walls creaked with the wind, and the air had a damp, earthy smell. It was perfect for a solitary retreat, or at least it seemed that way at first. I unpacked my bag, settled in, and spent the first few hours exploring the area. The woods surrounding the cabin were dense, thick with towering trees that blocked out much of the sunlight. It was eerily quiet, and I found that unsettling. There were no birds, no rustling of leaves, nothing. Just the whisper of the wind through the branches. I walked a bit farther out and found an old trail that seemed to lead deeper into the forest. It looked abandoned, overgrown with vines and moss, but still passable. I figured I'd follow it for a little while, see where it went. The air was cooler as I ventured farther, the trees growing taller and more oppressive, their roots twisting across the ground like the veins of the earth. I wasn't out for long, but it felt like hours. My feet crunched over the dry, fallen leaves, and every step seemed to echo in the emptiness. The trail twisted and turned, and eventually, I reached a small clearing. At first, I thought it was just a patch of open space in the woods. But as I looked closer, I realized there was something strange in the middle of the clearing. A large, jagged stone structure stood there, partially covered by vines and moss. It was out of place, too old to have been built recently, yet too solid to have crumbled away. It looked like some kind of altar or sacrificial stone, but there was no sign of any activity around it. No markings, nothing to indicate what it was for. I walked closer, curiosity pushing me forward. That's when I saw it. In the shadows, at the edge of the clearing, something moved. It was quick, darting between the trees. I didn't get a clear look at it at first, just a flash of something long and dark moving too fast to follow. My heart rate spiked and I froze. There was no sound, just the sudden awareness that something was nearby, watching me. I didn't want to be foolish, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I left the clearing and made my way back to the cabin. My mind raced, but I tried to dismiss the unease gnawing at the back of my mind. It was probably just an animal, some kind of large deer or maybe a bear. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't forget the way it moved. Too fluid, too unnatural. That night, I locked the doors and settled in with a book. But sleep wouldn't come easily. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were watching me, that something was out there, waiting. The silence outside the cabin was unnerving, deeper than any silence I'd ever experienced. And then there were the sounds. Around midnight, I heard scratching noises at the door, slow, deliberate, as if something was testing the strength of the wood. My heart stopped. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop, but it didn't. The scratching grew louder, more persistent, and it started to circle around the cabin. First one side, then the other, like it was pacing, sniffing around. I crept toward the window and peeked out, but all I saw was darkness. The moonlight barely touched the ground, and the trees blocked any view of the surrounding area. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and shined it out into the yard. Nothing, just the trees, still and quiet. I stayed up the rest of the night, too afraid to sleep, my ears straining for any sound of movement. By morning, everything seemed calm again. Too calm. The scratching had stopped, but the dread lingered. I considered leaving, but part of me didn't want to admit that I was scared. It felt like I was overreacting, that I just needed to calm down. So I decided to go back into the woods, maybe retrace my steps and get a better look at the strange stone structure. I headed out in the morning, carrying nothing but my phone and a bottle of water. The trail felt different in the daylight, more familiar, but the air still had that heavy, unnatural silence. As I approached the clearing again, I saw it. The creature. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen. It was crouched near the stone structure, its back arched unnaturally, its skin a sickly shade of gray. It looked like it was made from a tangle of shadows and twisted limbs, a mass of wiry, bone-thin arms and legs. Its eyes were wide, glowing a faint yellow, but they were empty, vacant, as if it wasn't truly alive. The creature made no sound, just stared at me with its unblinking eyes. I froze, panic gripping me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The creature tilted its head slowly, as if studying me, and that's when I noticed something worse, the way its mouth opened. It wasn't a mouth at all, not in the way humans have mouths. It was a jagged, gaping hole in the center of its face, full of rows of sharp, needle-like teeth, some crooked and others much longer than the others. I felt my throat tighten as a cold sweat broke out on my skin. The creature didn't approach. Instead, it just watched me, its eyes following every movement I made. I couldn't take my eyes off it, and it felt like time itself had slowed down, every second stretching painfully. I took a step back, then another. It didn't follow, but I didn't want to stick around to find out if it would. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back, didn't want to know if it was following me. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees pressing tighter, the trail twisting and confusing me more with each step. I wasn't sure how much time passed, but eventually, I made it back to the cabin, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I locked the doors, checked every window, and stayed inside, not daring to go outside again. That creature, whatever it was still out there, somewhere in those woods. And I wasn't sure if I would make it out alive if I stayed. I knew I had to leave. The next morning, I packed up my things and left before the sun had fully risen. As I drove away, I looked back at the cabin, the woods, but I didn't see the creature again. Maybe it was still watching from the shadows, or maybe it had just been a figment of my fear. But I didn't care. I never went back to that cabin. I don't know what I saw out there, but I'll never forget the way it moved, the way it looked at me. There are things in the woods, things that don't belong, and sometimes it's better not to know what they are. I've never been one to believe in the stories people tell around campfires. You know, the ones about creepy creatures or haunted woods. I've always chalked it up to the imagination running wild after too much beer or too many late-night ghost stories. But that all changed one winter, when I decided to take a solo trip to a cabin I rented in the middle of nowhere. A little getaway to clear my head. I didn't know it at the time, but it would be a trip I'd never forget for all the wrong reasons. The cabin wasn't anything special. Small, with just enough space for me to be comfortable but not so much that it would feel lonely. It was set far back in the woods, far from any real town or civilization. The kind of place where your nearest neighbor was probably miles away. The silence was almost deafening when I arrived. I remember stepping out of the car and just standing there for a while, taking in the crisp winter air. The trees were tall and barren, their skeletal branches swaying slightly in the wind. It was the kind of place that would have looked beautiful in a postcard. I unpacked my things and settled in quickly. I wasn't there to relax in luxury. I just needed peace, away from the stress of work and life in general. The cabin had the basics: wooden floors, a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a couple of rooms. Nothing fancy. That night, I made a simple dinner, grabbed a book, and tried to unwind. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only source of light besides a couple of lamps. It wasn't until the second day that things started to feel off. I woke up to the sound of something scratching at the door. At first, I thought it might have been an animal, maybe a raccoon or a squirrel, something that was just curious. But the scratching continued, and it was loud, more persistent than I expected from an animal. I figured I'd check it out, maybe scare it off with a loud noise or something. I grabbed a flashlight, put on my jacket, and opened the door cautiously. There was nothing there. I stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it. The ground was covered in a thin layer of snow, so any tracks would have been easy to spot. But there was nothing, just the empty silence of the woods. First, I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just the wind or something. But later that day, I noticed something strange. I had walked around the cabin earlier in the morning to check the area for any damage from the storm, and there had been no tracks in the snow then. But now, I saw a set of fresh prints just outside the cabin door. They were oddly shaped, unlike any animal prints I'd seen before. They didn't have the normal roundness of a paw or hoof. Instead, they were long, narrow, and almost pointed at the ends. I followed them cautiously, my heart starting to race a little. The prints led into the woods, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of the silence press against me as I walked deeper into the trees. The snow crunched under my boots, each step sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. I had always prided myself on being calm in situations like this, but now I was starting to feel a knot form in my stomach. The prints led me for what felt like miles, always curving in strange ways that didn't seem to follow any animal pattern I knew. They were deep, as though whatever had made them weighed a lot. But there was something more unsettling about them. The way they seemed to move in unpredictable directions, as though the creature had been wandering aimlessly or worse, circling back on itself. My flashlight flickered once or twice, and I couldn't help but feel the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I was about to turn around when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, some strange illusion in the dim glow of my flashlight. But no, it was real. There, standing in the shadows of the trees, was a deer. At least I thought it was a deer. It was bigger than any deer I'd ever seen, almost unnaturally so. It was standing perfectly still, watching me. Its coat was patchy, clumped with frost, and its legs were long and spindly. But what really made me uneasy was its face. The eyes were too wide, too white. They didn't reflect the light from my flashlight like they should have. They were flat and unblinking, like something that had never seen the light of day. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe it was some kind of bizarre hallucination. But no, it was still there, staring at me with those cold, empty eyes. I slowly took a step back, then another. My mind was racing, but I couldn't think clearly. Something told me that this wasn't just a weird animal. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't right. I tried to shake the feeling, convincing myself it was just some strange mutation or illness that made it look like that. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized it wasn't the deer that was wrong. It was the way it made me feel. It made the woods feel wrong, like everything around me was pressing in, closing off. Suddenly, the creature moved. It didn't bolt away like I expected. Instead, it turned its head in a slow, unnatural way, almost as if it was watching me with deliberate interest. Its legs moved with a strange, jerky motion as it began to walk toward me. The sound of its hooves, no, they weren't hooves anymore, was sickening. It didn't sound like the normal rhythm of a deer walking. It was like a dragging, scraping noise. The thing was coming closer, and I could hear the sickening squelch of its feet sinking into the snow. My heart started to race as I took another step back. It wasn't right. It wasn't a deer anymore. I had to get back to the cabin. Without thinking, I spun around and ran. My legs moved faster than I thought possible, my boots pounding against the snow as I tore through the trees. I didn't care where I was going, just away from that thing. I heard it behind me, but I didn't dare look back. The sound of its movements was like a nightmare. There was no way it was a normal animal. It was something else entirely. I don't know how far I ran, but eventually, I reached the cabin again. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my body was shaking from the adrenaline. I slammed the door shut behind me, bolted it, and backed away, staring at the walls in panic. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every sound outside made me jump. Every creak of the cabin made my heart race. I stayed up, watching the snow fall outside through the windows, unable to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that whatever had been following me was still out there, just waiting for the right moment to come closer. The next morning, I packed my things and left. I didn't care about the money I had spent on the cabin or how much I had wanted this trip to be peaceful. All I cared about was getting away from that place. As I drove back down the long, winding road, I passed the same stretch of woods where I had seen the creature. The trees seemed normal now. The air felt still, but nothing felt out of place. It was as if nothing had happened. The tracks I had seen the day before were gone, erased by the wind and fresh snow. But I know what I saw. I know what followed me, and I know that some things in the woods aren't just animals. Some things are much, much worse. I had been driving for hours, my hands gripping the wheel tight, eyes focused on the narrow, winding road ahead. The rain was relentless, tapping against the windshield like 1,000 tiny fingers. I didn't mind the weather. In fact, it was part of the reason I was heading to this secluded cabin in the woods. I needed to be alone. I needed to clear my head. The cabin had been my grandfather's. He'd left it to me after he passed, but I hadn't visited in years. I had heard stories from my parents about how he'd built it with his own hands, a little place tucked far away from anyone who might disturb him. And now it was mine. I needed space to think, to get away from the mess that had been my life for the past few months. The drive seemed longer than I remembered. The trees along the side of the road were thick and dark, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. It was late afternoon, but the overcast sky made it feel like night was already creeping in. As I pulled up to the cabin, I noticed something strange. The usual sense of comfort that I'd felt here before was gone. The door was ajar. Not much, just enough to notice. I told myself it was probably the wind, I'd been away for a while, and the place wasn't exactly sealed tight. I parked the car and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots. The air was damp and smelled of pine, but there was an underlying odor, something I couldn't quite place, like something old, like decay. I tried to shake it off, but it lingered in my nose as I walked up to the door, pushed it open. The floor creaked under my weight. Inside, everything seemed wrong. The furniture was just as I remembered, rough-hewn wood chairs, a stone fireplace, a large wooden table, but there was something off. The air felt heavier, like it was full of something unspoken. I set my bag down on the table, then went to the window. Outside, the storm had worsened, and now the wind howled through the trees. My grandfather had always said the woods were alive, full of secrets, but I'd never believed him. I never thought I would feel the way I did now, like the trees were watching me. There was a noise outside, a screeching sound, but not like anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a bird, not exactly. It was high-pitched, almost mechanical. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I turned away from the window quickly, my heart pounding. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks. But the noise came again, closer this time, and it didn't sound like anything natural. I grabbed a flashlight from the cabinet and stepped outside, the cold air biting at my skin. The woods were alive with sounds, but none of them made me feel the way this did. I had to find out what was making that noise. The light from my flashlight bounced off the trees as I walked, the wind howling through the branches. My footsteps were the only other sound, crunching against the wet earth. I felt a growing sense of dread as I ventured further away from the cabin. The trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like they were trying to pull me deeper into the forest. Then I heard it, a rustling, a sound like wings. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I froze, my heart racing. I turned the flashlight toward the noise. At first, I thought it was just a large bird, maybe an owl or something similar. But then I saw it. The creature was enormous, standing almost twice the height of a man. It had the body of a bird, but its legs were thick and clawed, like a raptor's. Its wings were massive, stretching wide, and its feathers were matted and dark, blending in with the night. But the most terrifying part was its head. It was not like any bird I had ever seen. Its beak was too long, too sharp, and its eyes, those eyes were glowing, a bright, unnatural red. I stood there, frozen in place, staring at the creature as it watched me. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. It screeched again, a high-pitched, ear-splitting cry that sent a jolt of fear through my entire body. My legs finally moved, and I turned to run, but the creature was faster. I could hear its wings flapping behind me, the sound of its claws scraping against the ground. I pushed myself harder, forcing my legs to move faster, but the darkness seemed to close in around me. The trees felt like they were getting thicker, and the ground beneath my feet was uneven. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could hear the creature getting closer, its screeches echoing through the forest. Just when I thought I couldn't run any longer, I saw the cabin up ahead. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I pushed myself forward, not caring if I tripped or stumbled. I reached the door, yanked it open, and slammed it shut behind me. The creature's screeches faded into the distance, but I could still feel its presence, like it was waiting just outside, watching me. I backed away from the door, my heart still racing. I didn't know what it was or what it wanted, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay here any longer. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a beast, but I knew I had to leave. The creature was still out there, and it was only a matter of time before it came back. I packed my things quickly, my hands shaking as I grabbed my bag. I glanced out the window one last time, but there was nothing there, nothing but the storm. I didn't waste any more time. I locked the door behind me, turned, and ran to the car. I drove away from the cabin, my heart still pounding in my chest. The rain was coming down harder now, the windshield wipers barely able to keep up. But I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from that place as I could. As I drove down the winding road, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The cabin was just a small speck in the distance, hidden by the trees. I thought I saw something move, something dark and large, but I couldn't be sure. All I knew was that I had to get out of there. I had to leave that place behind, and I wasn't going back. I've always found solace in the isolation of my cabin. It's tucked away in the woods, far enough from civilization that no one bothers me. The kind of place where, if you didn't have a car, you'd be walking for hours to get to the nearest road. I built it myself, piece by piece, and though it's simple, it's perfect for what I need. Just a small structure with a wood stove, a couple of chairs, and a bed for when I want to escape the noise of life. This weekend, I had come up for some peace and quiet. The leaves were changing, the air was crisp, and the world felt still. I was looking forward to it. Time away from the grind of work, no phone signal, no one to disturb me. Just me, nature, and the sound of the wind through the trees. But as the sun set on my first night, something felt off. It wasn't the usual stillness. It was the kind of quiet that presses in on you, heavy and suffocating. The wind had died down, and the forest had gone completely silent. Not a single animal sound. It's unsettling, but I figured it was just the time of year. The animals had probably retreated for the winter, or maybe they were just being cautious. Either way, I didn't think much of it at first. I made dinner, nothing fancy, just some beans and rice, and settled in for the evening. The fire crackled in the stove, and I sat in my chair, watching the flames dance. That's when I heard it. Faint sound. At first, it was so quiet that I thought I had imagined it. A soft scratching, like claws against wood, came from outside the cabin. I stood up, heart racing. The noise was faint, almost rhythmic, like whatever it was knew I was inside. I grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the door. Slowly, I cracked it open, trying to peer into the dark. Nothing. The woods were empty. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and stepped outside, my boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. I called out, expecting maybe a lost animal, but nothing responded. It was so cold that my breath formed clouds in the air. I turned to look back at the cabin, suddenly feeling exposed. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The scratching had stopped, but there was something else now, a presence. Something was watching me, and it wasn't the forest, which was always so open, so familiar. This was different. My instincts were screaming at me to go back inside, lock the door, and never come out. But I didn't. I couldn't explain why, but I stayed there, in the middle of the clearing, staring into the woods. The sound came again, this time closer, much closer. I spun around just in time to see a figure moving among the trees. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and it was hunched over like it had no bones. The thing's arms hung down almost to the ground, and it moved in jerky, unpredictable motions, as if it couldn't decide whether it was walking or crawling. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back toward the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me. The flashlight slipped from my hand and rolled across the floor. My breath was shallow, my hands trembling as I locked all the windows and doors. I didn't know what I had just seen, but I knew it wasn't anything normal. The night dragged on. I stayed by the stove, my eyes glued to the windows, waiting for any movement, any sound. But the cabin was quiet again. Hours passed. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by the sound of something heavy hitting the roof. My heart pounded as I stared at the ceiling, straining to hear. The thing outside was back, and it wasn't hiding anymore. It was close, too close. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the cabin, followed by a scraping sound, like claws against metal. I didn't wait. I grabbed my backpack, shoved some essentials in it, my phone, a flashlight, a knife, and went to the back door. The wind had picked up again, howling through the trees, masking the sound of whatever was out there. I yanked open the door and bolted. The woods swallowed me immediately, the trees closing in around me. The light from my flashlight barely cut through the darkness. My breath came in short bursts, and I didn't know which way to go. I just ran. Branches scraped at my face, the cold biting at my skin as I pushed forward. The scratching sound from before was back, following me, getting closer with every step. Then I heard it, a guttural growl, a sound that made my stomach drop. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before. This thing wasn't right. It was closer now, and I could feel the ground shaking with every step it took. My legs were burning, and I could hear it getting closer, the sound of something massive and terrifying moving through the forest. I knew it was a mistake to be out here, but I couldn't stop running. If I stopped, I'd be dead. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually the growling faded. The woods started to feel quieter, like I had outrun whatever was chasing me. I didn't stop, couldn't stop. I was so far from the cabin now, I didn't even know which direction I was heading. Then, finally, the sound of the growling stopped completely. The silence was deafening. I slowed to a walk, panting, every part of me aching. And then I heard it, the wind again. But this time, it didn't feel like the forest. It felt like something else was moving through it. Something behind me. I turned around, and that's when I saw it. Standing between the trees, watching me. It was the thing from before, the one I thought I had outrun. But now it wasn't hidden behind the trees. It was out in the open. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, pale and gray, almost translucent. Its eyes were black, completely black, and its teeth, they were too long. It opened its mouth, and I saw rows of teeth that didn't belong to any animal I knew. The air grew colder, and I knew I couldn't run anymore. I didn't have the strength, the energy. But then, as I stared at it, something shifted inside me. Something primal. A sense of survival, of urgency, that I hadn't known I still had. I didn't look away from the Wendigo. I didn't let it see my fear. I slowly, deliberately, pulled the knife from my bag. I knew it was pointless. I knew it would never stop it. But it was all I had, and that made me feel something, a spark of defiance. The Wendigo growled again, this time stepping closer. It didn't rush me. It didn't need to. It knew it had me. But in that moment, I wasn't going to make it easy. I lunged at it, the knife aimed directly for its chest. I didn't know if it would do any good, but I was damned if I would die without a fight. But the Wendigo wasn't the same as before. As I lunged, it vanished into the trees, faster than anything should have been. I stood there, breathing heavily, my heart racing, my body ready to collapse from exhaustion. For a moment, I thought it was over, that I had been spared. But then, in the distance, I heard something, a faint sound, a whistling. The wind? No, it was coming from something else. I was still running. I had been looking forward to my weekend getaway at the cabin for months. It was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, just me, nature, and the quiet that I craved so much in my daily life. The cabin, nestled deep in the woods, was far enough from civilization that the only sounds I expected to hear were the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional animal in the distance. I'd rented it for the weekend, a small wooden structure with just the basics: A fireplace, a small kitchen, a loft with a bed, and large windows that let in the light and the views of the surrounding forest. No one around for miles, no one to bother me, just what I needed. I arrived on Friday afternoon, parked my car in front of the cabin, and took a deep breath of the cool, fresh air. The smell of pine filled my lungs, and for a moment, I felt at peace. I'd brought some food, a couple of books, and my camera. I was planning on taking some pictures of the wilderness and just enjoying the solitude. The first few hours were blissful. I made myself a simple dinner of canned soup, sat by the fire, and read a bit before falling asleep on the couch. There was no one else around, and I was okay with that. The only thing I noticed, as the night deepened, was the silence. It was like the woods around me had gone still. No chirping insects, no rustling leaves, not even the occasional hoot of an owl. Just quiet, a deep, unnerving quiet. I woke up the next morning to the sound of birds chirping and the sunlight spilling through the windows. It was a beautiful day. I decided to go for a walk, explore the area around the cabin a bit, take some pictures. I grabbed my camera and walked out onto the small dirt path that led from the cabin. The trees towered above me, their branches swaying in the breeze, and the air smelled fresh and clean. I couldn't help but smile as I walked along the trail. It was exactly what I needed. But that peace didn't last long. As I walked deeper into the woods, I noticed something strange. A small trail of broken branches, as though something large had passed through. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just a deer or some other animal. But then, I heard it, a low, deep growl from behind the trees. My heart stopped. The sound was unmistakable. It was the growl of a bear. I froze, standing in place, trying not to make a sound. My eyes darted around, scanning the woods, trying to see if I could spot the animal. The growl came again, closer this time. My pulse quickened. Bears weren't common in this area, but I knew they were around. I had read enough to know how dangerous they could be, especially if they felt threatened. I took a slow step back, hoping I could quietly retreat to the safety of the cabin. But that's when I saw it. A massive, dark shape moved through the trees, its broad body swaying as it walked. My heart pounded in my chest, and I froze again. It was a bear, and it was big, easily twice the size of any bear I'd seen at the zoo. It was a black bear, its fur thick and glossy, and its eyes locked onto mine. I knew better than to run, so I stood as still as possible, hoping it wouldn't notice me. But the bear didn't look away. It was studying me, its eyes cold and calculating. I slowly took a step back, trying to keep my eyes on the bear while not making any sudden movements. My mind raced. What should I do? Bears were unpredictable, especially if they felt cornered or threatened. I remembered reading somewhere that playing dead sometimes worked, but I wasn't sure that would help here. The bear was still watching me, its massive frame moving slightly as it adjusted its position. I turned, just a little, to start making my way back to the cabin. That's when the bear took a step forward. Its massive paw hit the ground with a soft thud, and the growl rumbled deep in its chest again. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was no way I could outrun it, not in these woods, not with that kind of weight and power behind it. I kept walking, slower now, each step calculated, praying it wouldn't charge. I reached the edge of the trail where the trees started to thin out, and I could see the cabin just ahead. The bear still followed, but it was staying just out of sight, in the trees. I didn't know if it was curious or if it saw me as a threat, but either way, I was terrified. I reached the cabin and slammed the door shut behind me, heart racing. I leaned against the door for a moment, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know if the bear had followed me or if it was still out there in the trees, but I wasn't about to go back out there to find out. I locked the door and sat down on the couch, trying to calm my breathing. What was I supposed to do now? I couldn't stay cooped up in this cabin forever, but I sure as hell wasn't going to go back into the woods. I'd never felt more alone, more vulnerable than I did at that moment. The woods felt like a living, breathing thing, and that bear, it was part of it. I had intruded on its territory, and now it was waiting. As the day wore on, I kept peeking through the windows, but the bear didn't return. I tried to stay calm, but the thought of it still lurking nearby made my skin crawl. I checked the perimeter of the cabin several times, just to be sure. Nothing. No sign of the bear. Maybe it had moved on, or maybe it was waiting for me to make a mistake. By nightfall, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to stay here another night. I packed up what I could, grabbed my essentials, and left the cabin. I was taking my chances driving out, but I wasn't about to sleep another night with a bear just outside. The road out was a bumpy, winding trail, but I didn't care. I drove as fast as I could, my eyes scanning the woods, expecting the bear to suddenly appear on the side of the road, watching me. But it never did. I didn't stop until I was clear of the woods, the city lights ahead providing a sense of safety that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I didn't know if the bear had been waiting for me to leave or if it had just been curious, but I didn't want to find out. It was a relief to be far from the cabin, far from the woods. I couldn't say that I'd ever return to that cabin. The woods, the silence, the bear, all of it was too much. I had come for solitude, but what I found was a reminder of how little control we have over nature and how easily it could turn on us.